In today's video, we're covering the mistakes you want to avoid when you buy a Vancouver duplex. In my 18 years as a Vancouver realtor, I've seen these mistakes over and over again, and people lose so much money and have so much aggravation. I help my own clients avoid these mistakes, and now I can help you avoid those mistakes as well. Watch every single one of these points because all of them are integral to buying the right duplex and making sure you're not making incredibly costly mistakes. Let's get into all of them right now. My name is Sebastian Albrecht with the Living in Vancouver BC team. Welcome back to the channel. This channel is all about moving to and living in Vancouver. If that's stuff that interests you, well, you're in the right place. This week, we're talking duplexes and the mistakes you're going to want to avoid when buying a Vancouver duplex. And there are a lot of them. Very costly mistakes that I want you to avoid. But why are we talking duplexes and what exactly are they? So let's just cover very quickly exactly what a duplex is. In British Columbia, essentially a duplex defines owning a single piece of land between two people or two entities. The definition of a duplex in British Columbia is essentially how you divide ownership of a single piece of property between two owners, two legal entities. And so more often than not, that is a strata property, a strata titled property, but we're going to get into that a little more later in this video. And then why are we talking about it? Well, it's basically because they're becoming so incredibly popular. A few years ago in the city of Vancouver, the city's rezoned all land to say all single family residential land can now have duplexes built on it. It took a little while for that to be adopted, but these days in a lot of Vancouver neighborhoods, almost every single new house that's being built is a duplex. And the reason for it is they're incredibly popular with young families. Young families see it as a really viable option, that critical missing middle in between the condo step and the house step. Condos being typically too small and houses being typically too expensive. There's sort of this viable in between that is the duplex. And that is why it is increasingly becoming popular. Now, it's not affordable for everyone, but it really is a good middle ground between condos and houses. And that's why we're seeing these pop up everywhere these days. But now getting on to the mistakes and the mistakes that you're going to want to avoid if you're looking at buying a duplex. Mistake number one is not getting to know the neighbor, the co-owner, the person that you're going to be living with and owning this incredibly significant piece of property and owning this investment with. Basically, the two of you are going to be co-owners and you need to be able to get along with them. You're going to be living in pretty close proximity to that person. Perhaps the only people that you've ever lived in closer proximity with are your family and your spouse. And you really want to make sure that you're going to get along with them. So the first step would be really to get to know them a little bit. Ask some questions. Ask some questions of the real estate agent, the listing agent. Who are they? What do they do? How many kids do they have? I mean, if they have 10 kids in a 2-bedroom half duplex, that's information that you want to know. Another step would be to actually knock on the door. If you're really keen, really interested, meet them, have a conversation, ask them a couple questions, let them know what your intentions are and find out what they think about owning in the duplex. How has it been for them? What kind of people are they? What kind of sense do you get of the people that they are? And also at the very beginning, the other thing that you can be doing is just observing their half of the property. Is it full of, I don't know, swampland or wrecked cars or sports equipment? There's judgments you can make based on exactly what's in their yard and how they've been maintaining their property. Generally in Vancouver, you are going to see a uniformity from one side of the duplex to the other side. There isn't usually a big difference, but you are going to get a sense of how important the maintenance of the property is to them. And if that's important to you, that's a way of judging whether they're going to be on the same page with you or not. So not getting to know your neighbors is mistake number one when looking at buying a duplex in Vancouver. Mistake number two when buying a half duplex is not having an inspection done. Whether it's new or old, you definitely want to have an inspection done because there's a lot of systems involved in a half duplex that you want to understand and you want to make sure that everything is working. Essentially, the purpose of the inspection is to make sure that what you think you're buying is actually the condition that it's in. And so if you were told that the roof is brand new and the inspector goes up there and tells you, no, it's 10 years old or it's 20 years old, old, or yeah, it's brand new, but it wasn't installed properly. This is all very critical information. And I can tell you, in my experience, inspections are very, very important. No matter what the market is doing, whether they're incredibly busy or incredibly slow, if you're competing or not competing, you should try and get an inspection done. Now, there are circumstances where the competition in Vancouver can be so fierce that you may not have time to do an inspection, or you need to do an inspection before making an offer. So no matter what the market is doing, it's possible that you have the opportunity to have an inspection done. And it's something you definitely want to be talking to your real estate agent about, and you want to have some comfort with. I can tell you, I had a client not that long ago looking at brand new construction of half duplexes, and we looked at a few different places, and one of them looked great on paper. It was surprisingly cheap, had been on the market a little while. It wasn't quite clear from the outset, but my clients were excited and they wanted to make an offer, which we did. And as part of that offer, as part of their subjects, the conditions when they made that offer, they had written in an inspection. When that inspection took place, my inspector went through that property and came back and said, that is one of the worst properties I have ever seen. The guy who built that duplex should go back to flipping burgers. No offense to people who flip burgers, but they should not be building houses. That's how bad that inspection went. And my clients were able to walk away, thankfully. Funny enough, a couple months later, I had another client who wanted to purchase that property, and I had to tell them, let's not bother, because that place is a bit of a disaster. And as far as I'm aware, somebody did end up buying that property. I'm not sure if they did an inspection or not, but thankfully it wasn't one of my clients. Mistake number 3 would be not valuing the land. Too often people are so focused on the square footage of the inside space, they don't take into account the square footage of the lot. And the land is really one of the most significant pieces of what you're buying here in Vancouver. It's land that is making everything so incredibly expensive, the cost of it. And I think from my own perspective, it's the land that is the best long-term investment. That's one of the things that I like most about duplexes. If people are sort of waffling between townhouses and duplexes, I often try and promote the idea of a duplex, because I know they're going to be able to control the most possible land by buying a half duplex rather than by buying a townhouse. So the reality is that the internal square footage is often related to the external square footage. You know, there is a percentage ratio usually, but some of the older duplexes, that's not necessarily the case. You might have a smaller half duplex on a larger piece of land, typically with those older ones. The newer ones tend to build the maximum that they're allowed to build. So you're going to find typically with a 4,000 square foot City of Vancouver lot, you're going to be looking at around 15 to 1,600 square feet in that neighborhood. And for 6,000 square feet, you might be getting over 2,000 square feet. So you do want to pay very close attention, not just to that internal square footage, but the lot size as well, because that is the biggest part of your investment that you're making and the biggest potential windfall down the road. And mistake number 4 would be not understanding your options. And let me begin by saying there are different kinds of duplexes. We do have side-by-side duplexes, we have front and back duplexes, and we have some, not very many, top and bottom duplexes. Those aren't terribly popular, and I don't see them very often. In fact, I was looking for examples of each of these, and the top and bottom, I couldn't find one that had recently sold in our market. But the front and back is typically what you're going to find most common on smaller lots. It's the way that dividing the space kind of makes most sense, because if the lot is relatively small, and in Vancouver that would be a typical lot 33 feet wide, your residence is about 13, 14 feet wide if you're side by side, and that's just not wide at all, right? So it's not a very pleasant living experience. What makes a lot more sense is the front and the back, and it allows a lot more privacy between the two units, and that tends to work really well. There's also a lot less sort of shared wall, which is another important factor. So on smaller lots, what you tend to find is the front and back duplex. But when lots get larger, like around 6,000 square feet, that's typically a 50-foot wide lot, and larger lots, we see a side-by-side duplex more often than not. And those have their own pluses and minuses. You get the front yard and the backyard. You don't have to worry about sharing sort of a pathway with your neighbor. You don't have to worry about access into the garage and that type of thing. So Some people will prefer front back. Some people will prefer side by side. Very few people that I know prefer top and bottom. But also, did you know that there's an opportunity to have a suite in a duplex? And more commonly, especially as we start to see larger duplexes on larger pieces of land, builders are putting in suites, or at least the option to have a suite, or sort of like an in-law suite or something, a guest suite in the lower level. And it's not going to be a large space. You're not going to have a massive 2-bedroom suite down there, but that would allow some flexibility as your kids get older, or if you have an aging parent that you want to have live with you, or if you want some income to help pay the mortgage. That is an option that is increasing in our market. There's not a lot of them, but they are out there. Another thing to be aware of is that age really does impact the size of the duplex. So typically we see with the older duplexes, they're smaller, and you might find they're as small as 1,000 square feet or 1,200 square feet. And this is on what looks like a single family residential lot, but they're not incredibly spacious. With the more recent changes to the building code and what the city allows, we're seeing on the same size lot, somewhere in the neighborhood of 1,500 to 1,600 square foot duplexes. And so you do want to be aware that there are options. And what is also related to those different sizes and those different styles is price. And so if you are budget constrained, you might be wanting to look at a different option. There might be a top and bottom duplex on a smaller lot, and it might only be 1,200 square feet. And because of those limitations, the price may be a lot lower, and that might be okay with you. That might allow you to get into the market and own a piece of land. So keep all of those options in mind. But when you're looking at a half duplex, you definitely want to be aware of what the options are. So perhaps the biggest mistake that people make when they're buying a half duplex is that they don't realize that they're buying into a strata. What strata means, it's the legal division of a single piece of property amongst many owners. In this case, with a duplex, it's just 2 owners, but it does happen. And 99% of the time in Metro Vancouver, that is what a duplex is. There is another option. It could be a party wall agreement between the 2 owners. Essentially, they're 2 freehold properties that just abut one another. They share a wall, and so they have a legal agreement that allows them to do that. But that's not what 99.9% of half duplexes in Metro Vancouver are. The vast majority of them are regulated by the Strata Property Act. And what that means is there are laws that govern what you can and can't do. Most of half duplexes are actually non-compliant. They don't follow all of the regulations set out in the Strata Property Act. Like they won't do AGMs, they won't have strata minutes, they won't have a trust account, they won't collect a maintenance fee. That is very common. But when you're looking at buying a half duplex, you want to ask the question, is this a non-compliant or a compliant strata? The answer is going to be most likely non-compliant, and that's not unusual. That shouldn't necessarily freak you out about buying into a half duplex. But you do want to understand what you're getting into, and you want to understand that when you're buying into a half duplex, you have another owner that you are sharing this with, and there are laws governing how you are meant to get along. And a bad situation can go really badly sideways. So the first step is understanding the legal situation that you're in and the sharing of the property that you have with the other owner. That basis is going to go a long way to ensuring that you have a successful period of ownership of a half duplex with all the benefits of owning a half duplex. And you also want to be aware that there is a document that dictates how you split costs. And while there are no fixed maintenance costs usually, there are some costs that come up where you do need to figure out who owes what. And the most critical one would be insurance, but there also might be, I don't know, gutter cleaning or window cleaning or a lawn mowing or a little bit of gardening. And the way that you divide that is written out in the Strata Property Act, and it's by the unit entitlement that is in the strata plan. And that is where you see that division of ownership of one side to the other and who owns what on the property between the 2 owners. Mistake number 6 is not taking into account quote unquote hidden costs. And I touched on a couple of those just a moment ago, but quite often when people buy into a duplex, they don't realize that there might be some fixed costs. You might share a heating system with the other owner, and you're going to want to know how much does it cost to heat the place, or that's going to be an expense that you share in over time. There is insurance costs. I mean, these days, mostly insurance companies can bill the 2 sides of the strata separately, so you don't have to sort of rely on each other to to pay that. You can do that separately, most often is what I found in Metro Vancouver. But there might also be some other costs. I mean, you might decide to hire a gardener or somebody to clear the snow. Maybe you have a long driveway, a shared driveway, and maybe you want to have that cleared in the winter months and the odd time we actually get snow. Maybe it's gutter cleaning or window cleaning, things like that. And it's typically the unit entitlement that's in the strata plan that is going to determine how you split those costs. But when you're analyzing expenses, you have to understand there are costs that are fixed and may be unexpected if you don't really look under the cover and you don't know what to expect when you're looking at buying a duplex. So an important thing is to understand those hidden costs when buying a duplex. Mistake number 7 is getting way too obsessed about square footage. And here I'm talking about internal square footage. I do think external square footage, the lot size is justifiable, but I think we don't want to get too caught up into the minutia of square footage. The reality is you can get 5 different people to measure a space and they will all come up with slightly different numbers. And so if a client came to me and said, we want a place no smaller than 1,500 square feet, I would suggest to them, let's not be too firm on that number. Let's be open to maybe looking down to 1,400 square feet, because there could be a place that's 1,412 square feet that actually feels bigger and potentially actually is bigger than a space that is 1,502 square feet. Over the course of 2 or 3 levels, that difference can be really minimal. And a lot of it can have to do with the layout, corridors and stairs, and the amount of windows, the amount of light that comes into a space. A slightly smaller space can sometimes actually be larger than a bigger space on paper, but it could also feel bigger depending on the layout and the light and the amount of windows. So I wouldn't get too caught up with the exact square footage. Have a little bit of an open mind and you won't miss out on some really nice properties. Mistake number 8 is getting too caught up in the bells and whistles. And here I'm talking about things like staging, cleanliness, photos, and light. So all of that is sales and marketing, right? And I talk with my clients quite frequently when we're going out and buying properties. Let's focus on the most important things, the location, the structure, and what your priorities are about the space that you're trying to buy. Don't get too caught up in, the dirty dishes in the sink or the personal family pictures on the wall, things like that. And all of that can be really distracting. The reason that people stage is because it actually works. And you're going to notice, that experience when you go into a show home, you really feel good in that space and it makes an immense difference. But if you walk into another property that maybe is tenanted and the tenant isn't terribly cooperative, there's dirty dishes in the sink, there's dirty laundry on the floor, and the furniture it's too big and there's stuff everywhere. If you can see past all of that and realize this is the location I want, the price is attractive, the structure of the home, the thing that is really hard to change. I can change the carpeting, I can clean this place, I can wash the floors. None of that is terribly expensive, and my family would love this home. You want to see past all of the lipstick on the pig, essentially, and see it for what it really is and see the potential. If you're able to do that, that's another secret to really uncovering hidden gems around Metro Vancouver. Mistake number 9, I think, is not considering a townhouse as an alternative. There are a lot of people who are like, no, it's absolutely just a duplex. That's all I want. And fine enough. If ultimately that is your decision, good for you. Go for it. But you do want to look at the alternative, which could be a decently sized townhouse. And there are a lot of advantages. I mean, for one, you don't need to ever worry about cleaning the gutters or mowing the lawn. Somebody else is taking care of that. You're paying a maintenance fee for that luxury, but those things are going to be taken care of for you in a well-run strata, in a well-run townhouse community. And so you can quite often find sort of the size and the options that you might be attracted to in a duplex in certain townhouse developments. They may have an attached garage. They might have a little bit of a yard. Not a lot of them do, but those could be options for a townhouse. And so you might find you can save a little money by buying into a townhouse development instead of a half duplex. Just keep it in your mind. Look at it as an option. You may realize, no, that doesn't work for me. I really do want a duplex, but just make sure you're taking townhouses into consideration. And so looking at options, it's really a lot of what I do. As a real estate agent that has helped hundreds of people move to Metro Vancouver, I am always offering options. If you're thinking of moving to Vancouver and you need some guidance, you want to find a good fit for you, well, reach out to me anytime. There's never any pressure. All it is a conversation. I'd love to help you and your family settle in Metro Vancouver whenever you're ready. But if you're not quite there, you want to do a little more research, a little more investigation, I got you covered as well. I have nearly 100 videos all about living in and moving to Vancouver. You have a question, I have the answers for you. I can almost guarantee that. In the meantime, I do have a video that I think you're really going to enjoy, and it's a video along the same lines. If you're looking at options in terms of duplexes, this video right here is going to help you understand the mistakes to avoid when buying a townhouse. Be sure to check that video out. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you next week.